Saw, guys, what a franchise. My favourite franchise of all time, Saw. Guys, how are you? And welcome back to another video here. Axel Williams. Subscribe, guys, of course. Subscribe to the channel, guys. We're talking about Saw today, guys. For me, my favourite horror franchise of all time. In a previous video, you all know we talked about Scream, which is another movie that I absolutely love. I love the first Scream movie. But today, guys, we're talking about Saw and how Saw actually kind of changed the direction of horror movies in general. It was very original. The first thing I'll say about Saw was very original when it came out. It was something very different. You know, every 15, 20 years someone comes out and makes a completely original idea that just blows everyone away. I think Saw was that. I remember when I first watched the first Saw film. I watched it on a copyright DVD thing. Don't arrest me, policeman. I'm sorry. This was a long time ago. Please don't come for me. But I remember watching it and I didn't actually understand it first time. It doesn't help the copy was pretty poor. But I just remember the iconic scene of Jigsaw standing up at the end of the movie in the bathroom and literally revealing to himself that he was in charge of the games for the whole movie and he was overseeing everything from the start and he was pretending to be dead in the middle of the room. And I just thought, when I first watched that film, I remember him standing up and I said out loud, "He's a zombie!" To which everyone replied, "No, he ain't." Well, how is it? He's dead. He's bleeding. He's dead. He must be a zombie. He was pretending to be dead and he was actually the guy who's running the show. He's the guy who's running the show. My mistake. I'm sorry. I'm an idiot. I just remember Saw coming out and I remember thinking, this is different. No one has ever tried to make a horror film like this before. You know, you look at Saw kind of comes under that slight slasher thing, doesn't it? Where you've got a killer who's kind of going around killing different people, but it does it in such an inventive, original way. And this is what I love about Saw. Jigsaw, of course, the guy who has cancer, he hasn't got long to live, and he wants to basically set out to make people appreciate their life. That is basically his goal, and he puts them in traps in which, if they don't survive, they somehow find a way to kill themselves. And that is the originality of Saw as well, is the fact that he doesn't actually kill his victims. He finds ways for his victims to kill themselves through the traps that he builds. And I remember watching Saw 1 to 3 in particular, and I just remember being blown away. The characters are fantastic as well, particularly for me in the first 3 Saws. In the first one, you've got Adam and Dr. Gordon in the toilet, you know, that prehistoric bathroom, and they're kind of locked away and they have to pass a series of tests in order to get out. Until this point, I had only ever seen slasher films like Halloween, Scream, like I mentioned, Urban Legend, I Know What You Did Last Summer. Saw just ripped up the script, didn't it? And created a rather original and iconic type of horror. And the best thing about the Saw films, particularly the first 3, is that at the end of each film, there was a fantastic twist. At the end of Saw, the original, like I mentioned, they had Jigsaw stand up in the middle of the room, and then I think Dr. Gordon had already chopped off his leg at this point, so he was out of the room, and Adam was there looking at him thinking, oh my god, 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 oh my god. Saw 2 obviously had Detective Matthews, who was looking for his son. Jigsaw was obviously the only person who knew the location of where the game was being played in Saw 2, because obviously in Saw 2 you had a group of people going around an abandoned house, and they had to obviously pass a series of games in order to get out. And Jigsaw obviously knew the whole game. He'd sorted it out, he'd obviously created it, he'd been the mastermind behind it. And Detective Matthews, you know, was getting angry at this point. He beat the living crap out of Jigsaw and said, "Take me to the house right now. I want to save my son." To which point we find out at the end of the film that all of the security footage throughout the film that Detective Matthews was watching of his son walking around this abandoned house with all these convicts was actually all pre-recorded and it had already taken place. So when Detective Matthews got to the house, everybody was dead and long dead, and Detective Matthews was kind of now in danger. Saw 3 was kind of when it started to tail off a little bit, I felt. It had some great scenes, of course, but I always felt that in Saw 3, the twists were starting to get a bit thin. They were starting to run out of ideas for good twists at the end of the movies. And then they just completely forgot about it for Saw 4 to Saw 7. Saw 4 to Saw 7, for me, Saw went from being a terrific psychological thriller, you know, psychological horror in the first 3 movies to being just a flat-out gauze fest from Saw 5 to probably 7. I just wanted to get as much blood in the scenes as possible from that point. I'm not complaining because I still love Saw at that point. I still love watching them, but you could see where it tailed off and you could see where that transformation began from being a unique, well thought of psychological horror to just being a generic gauze fest. And it's like anything, I've said it so many times, it's like anything, you keep spinning the yarn, eventually you're going to run out. And that's not to say that in the later Saw films there weren't some great ideas, because there were some great ideas even later in line in the Saw movies, like the shotgun carousel I always thought was a fantastic idea in Saw 6. You know, there's still some good ideas and some good concepts that Saw actually, you know, that the directors and writers came up with. You know, in Saw 6 as well, you have Hoffman being finally unveiled as the follow-up killer to Jigsaw, where they're de-scrambling his voice on the tape to find out who the original, where the original source came from, and obviously it reveals that it was Hoffman. But it did get to that point in Saw where it just felt like copy and paste. I always remember Saw 6 and Saw 7 literally feeling like a basic clone of each other. In Saw 6, you've got the guy who works at the health insurance company who has to go through a series of games. In Saw 7, you've got Bobby Dagan, who fakes being in a trap to get publicity and attention, has to go through a series of games. And it always felt exactly the same. Their stories as individuals may be different, but the way the film kind of fell into place felt very much the same. And I always say it, when you start going back on yourself and when you start repeating stuff that you've already done, that's when it's time to probably call it quits. But unfortunately, money talks, and it does. It really does talk. I pulled a £20 note out of my wallet yesterday and it said hello to me. How freaky is that? But Saw is a fantastic franchise, don't get me wrong. And as for the new ones, I watched the Jigsaw 2018, I watched Spiral, and I watched Saw X. Spiral was absolutely god-awful. Chris Rock, who thought it was a good idea to actually cast the talking zebra as the main character in a gory horror movie? Chris Rock, and I feel sorry for him that he got slapped by Will Smith because he didn't deserve that. If I was there, I would have given Will Smith one of them. But who thought it was a good idea to have a talking zebra as the main character for Saw Spiral? Spiral from the Book of Saw. It was very strange choice. He didn't fit in. He was so goofy throughout the film. His acting was very poor. It's not his fault. He was casted wrong. But that film for me was absolutely shocking. I would give that a 1 out of 10. And the 1 is for the fact that they played the original Saw theme at the end. That's where the 1 comes from. Saw X, I probably didn't rate that either. You had Jigsaw obviously having that operation performed on him, and then it turns out that they were just conning him out of all of his money, and they didn't actually perform an operation on him. Or they didn't actually do it properly. They just wanted, they just took him for all of his money. They tried to make out things happen that didn't happen as well. They try and fill the gaps of previous films by pretending stuff happened that didn't actually happen. They just kind of fart out a storyline out of thin air and say, this is what happened, that fills that gap, and you have to just accept it, and I don't. But no, like I said, as a franchise, Saw is iconic, and again, I mentioned it with Scream. There were certain aspects of Scream that inspired a lot of slasher films around that time, or more modern slasher films. More modern slasher films don't look anything like they used to. They're not as gritty, they're not as gloomy. They're a bit more hip, aren't they? Slasher films over the past 10, 15 years have been a bit more hip, and I think that's largely to do with Scream. But I always feel any kind of movie now where someone's being put in some kind of game, it just reminds me of Saw, and maybe that's not actually the case. Maybe it's not inspired by Saw, maybe it's just a coincidence that it happens to have that feel. But I do feel Saw, especially at the time when it came out, did change the ball game. It really did. It changed the direction of horror. It was a massive film, wasn't it? It was a huge film, and now I think it's the highest engrossing horror movie franchise ever. Correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was as of last year, but I could be talking out my ass. But yes, guys, Saw, what a franchise, guys. Give me your thoughts on Saw, guys. For me, one of the greatest, if not the greatest horror movie franchise of all time. I absolutely love Saw. I love the inventiveness, I love the originality, and I love the tapes, Jigsaw talking on the tapes. It gets you excited, it makes you smile. It's just, everything about the film is fantastic. It's such an iconic franchise. You've got the Billy Doll, Jigsaw, the traps, the soundtrack at the end, not forgetting the song at the end of each movie that plays as well. When the twist is about to be revealed, you hear that classic Saw theme song. Everything about Saw for me is brilliant. But obviously, yes, it's done that thing like every movie does, where it just spans the yarn too far. But we love Saw either way. Guys, subscribe and like, and I will see you very shortly for another video, guys. Thank you ever so much for watching, and take care of yourself, guys. Have a fantastic day, and I'll see you soon for another video that should be just as interesting as this one. At least we hope so. Guys, goodbye for now.